my name is Emily. I'm 28 years old and I'm currently 18 months into my fertility journey. Today I'm going to talk about my experience with the 2 diagnostic procedures that I've had so far during my trying to conceive journey. So far I've had a hysterosalpingogram or a HSG test, and I've had a saline infusion sonogram, so a SIS. I am not a medical professional at all. This is just going to be more of my personal experience and story with it. And if you're somebody who is nervous and looking around for people's personal experiences with it and want some, maybe not advice, but maybe somebody to tell you that it's going to be okay, I can tell you that I went through it and I survived, so so I'll just get into it. So the first test that I did, which was before I was working with a fertility specialist, when I had been trying for about 14 months, my gynecologist suggested that I go get the HSG test done. Where I live, you have to go to the hospital to get that test done. I think in some places they can do it at like a imaging center or places like that, but there's no place like that around me. So that day I did work in the morning, and then I took like a half day from work and I went to the hospital for the afternoon. The hospital was fine. It is COVID right now. When I walked into the place where I thought it was like, it said like imaging center in big letters. So I walked in there, they took my temperature, I sat down, I waited about a half hour, and then they were like, oh, you're in the wrong place. So then I was kind of in crunch time to get, so I'm like always trying to be early for things, but because of all that, I was a little bit, yeah, in crunch time, so that was a little bit stressful. I had to go to the actual hospital, like walk into like where people would go for the emergency room and stuff like that. So I had to check in, then they gave me a code. I used the code to get into the elevator. It brought me to the room I was supposed to be in. It was another like probably hour of waiting for them to call me into the back room. When they called me into the room, they had me get undressed and they said, we're going to be doing x-rays, like kind of warning me about what that could entail as far as radiation and things like that. So I did ask them to put a, I think it was like a magnet, it was like a heavy piece of like scarf basically, and they put that over my neck to prevent any radiation from getting to my thyroid, I believe, was what they said. But the other place that they usually block would be the place that they were looking at, so like the uterus in that area, so they weren't able to block that. For the HSG test, you have to make sure that you are not pregnant before you're getting the test. So how they did it for me, and I think how they usually do it, is you have to have a cycle and then get it and not have any like intercourse between when you have your cycle and when you're going in for your test. So I had it on like day 9, like 2 days after I had finished my period. And yeah, so they have you lay down. I had a nurse in there and a physician's assistant who was doing the procedure, and I love to talk to physician's assistants. I have my fur baby here because my sister is going to school to be a physician's assistant, so I always have like a jumping off point, and that's like a conversation starter. If you get a little bit like anxious in these situations, which I think everybody does, it's nice to have something to like talk about that kind of brings you out of the moment. So we talked about where she went to school, where my sister's going to school and all that, and that was kind of nice. So I was laying down. They were very, I have to say, like these people specifically were very intentional about keeping my modesty in mind. They allowed me to be covered everywhere that like could possibly be covered, and everything that had to be exposed, they were very like, let me have like a towel or like a little sheet or something so I didn't feel like overly exposed, and I thought that was really nice, even though I'm not like necessarily a super like shy person. I understand like if it's medical things at this point, it's like okay, but I did like that, and they were very much like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, this is what it might feel like, and talking me through the steps like that, which is another thing that I really like. I feel like it's good to be talked through what's going on, especially when you can't really like, you have to lay still, you can't really tell what is going on, you know. So I'm laying there, then they put a catheter that went like through the cervix, and then they put dye into the cervix, and they let the dye go in. The one person is there doing the procedure, so that was the physician's assistant, and then when they get the dye in and that's all good to go, they called in another person who's, I guess it's their specialty, to be reading the ultrasound or the x-rays. He came in and he was reading it, and then he had me try to like twist my body and my hips, like rotate them in different ways, and then he was like, okay, we're done, you have a blocked fallopian tube, your doctor will call you and tell you more about it. And yeah, that was like, okay. And if you hear, like, if you listen to my fertility story, you'll have a little bit more context, but basically I didn't think that I had anything physically wrong, because I've known since I was 19 that I had hormonal imbalance, so I thought that that was pretty much going to be what my issue was, but turns out I have other issues. So I was really shocked in that moment, but I didn't have like any time to like absorb it or whatever. As far as the pain of the procedure, I have very intense period cramps, and it basically felt like that during the procedure. If you're like me and like your day 2 period can kind of feel like a stabbing pain rather than like a throbbing pain. I know I'm not the only one because my sister gets this too, so I figure there's a couple of us out there. If you suffer like that, it's pretty similar to that feeling, I would say. At least that's how it was for me. It was like the kind of like jabby, like stabbing cramps rather than like a, like, you know, stomach cramp, like where it's that squeezy feeling. And if you don't get cramps, then you have no idea what I'm talking about, and you will probably feel that it is quite painful. And that's what I had kind of guessed, and they said that too. They were like, yeah, girls who never have cramps think this procedure is super painful. Girls who get really bad cramps are kind of more, you know, chill during it because it's a familiar pain. So that was pretty much it. I went to my car and I cried and I called my mom, and then it was just time to move on. At that point, I went in, and then I had to wait 2 weeks to go in and talk to my doctor, and that was a little bit like, those 2 weeks, like I didn't know what it meant, you know. I didn't have any reason to believe that I did have my fallopian tube blocked, so when I found that out, I was very confused. So when I talked to my doctor, she was basically like, okay, this is the end of the line for me. I can't help you anymore. So we're gonna have you start working with a fertility specialist. Then I went to the fertility specialist, and the first thing that they did was did a regular ultrasound, or a transvaginal ultrasound, and they found out that my uterine lining was very thick, so they had to induce a period. I got my period. After my period, I went in for a saline infusion sonogram. The day I went in for my saline infusion sonogram, I went in the morning. I had heard that they don't hurt as much as the HSG test, so I wasn't really that worried about it. When I went in, they had me, of course, like get undressed, and there was a nurse and a physician's assistant that was in the room when the procedure was being done. The physician's assistant was doing the procedure. She took like a syringe like this big that was filled with saline, and she put in a catheter and then filled up my uterus with the saline. But because I had just ended my period, there was still some things like some blood or period still left in there. So they had to like rinse out the inside of my uterus. So they used the full thing of saline, and then she asked the nurse to go get another one. So that procedure ended up being, it was definitely more time. Like it took them a lot more time, or they maybe took their time with it, which is good. But because of that, it was a little bit, I would say, more painful just because it took longer. And because they had filled up my uterus so much with saline, I was cramping like the rest of the day, and I felt very bloated for the rest of the day, which makes sense, you know, my body was filled up with extra liquid and stuff. When they were looking inside, after they had cleared out anything that was in there, she was trying to figure out what she was seeing. She was like looking in one corner of my uterus, and she was like, oh, put it into 3D mode. No, take it out of 3D mode. Like she was looking and looking, trying to figure out what it was. And then she told me that I had endometrial polyps, or I have a endometrial polyp. I'm not really sure because she was only looking in one spot. So either like there's maybe like a cluster of them, or there's just one. But I have my pre-op appointment this Friday, so I'll be able to find out a little bit more about exactly what is going on. But yeah, so that's something to maybe expect that day. That day I had the procedure in the morning, and I went to work after, and it was definitely harder to have work after than to have like the rest of the day off after. But it wasn't so bad. I mean, it was like basically like being on my period, essentially. Just like a little bit more bloated than I usually would get on my period. And neither procedure was that bad. Both procedures would probably be quite painful if you're a girl who has never had cramps or doesn't get very bad cramps. Like if you go through your cramps and you're like, nah, I don't feel like I need to take anything, like it's not that bad, then you probably want to take something beforehand for this procedure, because it probably will be kind of that bad. I didn't take anything before I had the HSG because I wasn't given that instruction. So I probably felt that more acutely also than the saline infusion sonogram. Before the saline infusion sonogram, I took 2 Tylenols about an hour before because I was given that instruction by the doctors, which was nice. They're trying to make sure that I didn't feel too much of it. And it really wasn't that bad. Neither one of them was that bad. So if you are going through this, I'm praying for you. I know that you can do it. It will be awkward and uncomfortable, maybe a little painful in the moment, but it's all worth it, right? You're trying to get your body healthy, get yourself ready to have a baby, and I'm giving you all baby dust if that's what you're looking for. But thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you soon.